Thank you all for being here at this awesome presentation for the XR Enablement Track, Day 1 here at AWE. I'm Louis Normandin, COO of Wild Capture, and with me today, leading this panel, are two awesome folks, Paul Boustead, who is a VP of Product and Architecture at Dolby, and Michael Kolbrener, who is the COO of Odyssey. Today they're going to have a fireside chat with us, and I love this title, Unleashing Immersive XR Experiences with Cutting-Edge Audio Technology. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Mic's on? Yeah, great. Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Super excited to be here. Really great conference. Happy to be here with Paul. I think the most important thing to think about when we think about XR is what the audio experience is. And I want you to think during this discussion all the time about what your real-life audio experiences feel like and what your expectation is when we go into XR for what your audio experience. And I think audio is the key differentiator. And Paul from Dolby is going to share some of the innovations that they've created at Dolby. I work at Odyssey, and at Odyssey, we've incorporated these innovations to create an immersive, real feeling experience on our platform. Paul, would you introduce yourself?
So I'm VP of Product for Dolby.io, and Dolby.io is Dolby's developer platform, and our charter is to make Dolby technologies easier to get access to through APIs, SDKs, and click-through licensing agreements. Why am I talking about XR? I've got a bit of background in the space. I've been working on and off in games, VR, and virtual worlds for the last 20 years. I started 20 years ago in the early 2000s as an academic at a university in Australia, and we started looking at how to recreate natural communication scenes, very complex natural communication scenes, like cocktail party experiences where you may have a lot of people around you, many overlapping conversations, and trying to replicate those in VR. The first VR conference I went to was IEEE VR in 2005 in Bonn. Yep, VR was pretty hot at that time, but the devices were not that compelling. So I spent time at that conference, and after the conference I decided maybe it wasn't the right time, and we moved to massively multiplayer games, and we applied our technology to that space. And I ended up starting a company with a few of my PhD students, and we built out middleware for massively multiplayer games, and ended up selling the company to Dolby a few years later. And Dolby.io includes some of the technology which came from my startup originally, but many other things that help people create immersive online experiences.
Yeah, that's great. You know, and so at Odyssey, we are partnered with Dolby.io using their spatial audio technology, which creates a realistic sound environment for the events that we curate. So on the Odyssey platform, you're able to host, experience, and events self-service in a web-delivered extended reality or augmented reality. And the spatial audio allows us to replicate what it's like at a conference. When I walk up to Paul in Odyssey, he starts to hear me speak to him. When I walk away, my voice starts to get quieter, and I can walk up to somebody else. So we can have private conversations in a conference setting in our virtual reality in the same way that we do here. So, Paul, what is important about audio in XR? What are the key things we're looking for?
So audio in games, spatial audio in games has been really important to immerse people into the experience, game players into the experience. In VR, it is actually even more important because you've got this very immersive visual environment, and you need a matching audio environment to, so that the experience is immersive. So one of the things that you have to take into account is that you must do the audio through the headphones in the headset itself or headphones plugged into the headset. You can't rely on external speakers, because one of the really nice parts about VR is because you've got head tracking, you can update your audio experience based on head location, and that really helps with the spatial experience. In order to actually locate sounds around you, if you keep your head still, it's really not that easy. So we naturally move our head left and right to be able to locate sounds. You do it automatically. So it means that headphone virtualization is crucial for VR. And headphone virtualization is pretty cool. So you can, headphone virtualizer can make an object sound like it's coming from around the listener. And the way it does it is it models the interaction between that sound, your face, your head, and your ears, and creates a virtual version of the sound that you would hear within your ear canals. So that process actually works quite well. However, for the last while, most of the headphone virtualizers have all been based upon a general representation of head and ears, so it works well for some people and not others. So I think the real key thing with VR at the moment is making sure that you have good headphone virtualizers that actually take into account your head shape. And the nice thing is there's been releases from Apple on iPhone with a personalized headphone virtualizer. And Dolby has one too. We've got Dolby Atmos PHRTF, which is a really nice product. And basically you have a setup phase where you take your phone and it uses the camera and also the depth sensor to create a 3D model of your head. And then you can use that in the virtualizer to create a personalized experience for yourself. So it's pretty exciting in VR at the moment. You can get, with head tracking and with personalized audio, you can actually get a fantastic experience.
Yeah, I think in our Odyssey platform, the 3D virtual experience is exciting and people get excited because of the audio. Because when I walk into this virtual space, I can hear Paul on my right channel. And if somebody comes up to me on the left side, I actually hear them on my left channel. Or if I'm walking up to some streaming video or to a product demonstration, I start to hear it as I approach it from those channels. And when you start to think about the positionality in the space, you can start to create an audio experience that really, it sounds even better than if we were walking up to it in a large room that didn't have the right acoustics. We can control that acoustic experience. So, immersive experience are becoming more lifelike, and we kind of talk about that. What do you think we should expect when we think about online events, when we start to think about what it looks like to have a lifelike virtual experience?
Well, I really think I think that we can really make online virtual experiences as good, if not better, than face-to-face experiences. There's quite a lot of way to go to do it, but I think it's achievable in the future and something we're really interested in at Dolby. And so with VR, you can get a great immersive visual and audio experience. However, I don't think that's enough to make virtual events as good as face-to-face events. So one thing I like to use is a music concert, an in-person music concert as an example of a great in-person experience. And I like to think of it in terms of the immersive nature, the interactive nature, and also the social nature of that experience, and how can we replicate that in a virtual world. And the immersive side, I think, is pretty covered by VR. You can create a great immersive experience. So if you're at a concert, you're surrounded by people, you're surrounded by audio, it's a great experience. However, I think it also needs to be interactive to be great. And interactive here, there is an interaction between the band and the audience, and that really makes an event. So if the band can G up the audience and get the audience excited, they can respond, and you get this energy flowing between the audience and the band. And I think that's something that needs to be replicated in online events. And the important thing with that is delay. You've got to be able to get the experience out to the viewers in low enough delay that there can be interaction. The other part is social. If you attend a real concert, you can attend with friends, you can talk to them while it's happening. But actually, even more importantly, I think, you're at an event, you're surrounded by people who like the band, and you feel the atmosphere of the audience itself, not just the band. It's a big part of the experience. So there are a lot of online or virtual world concerts at the moment, and they're really great. Like the Travis Scott concert a little while ago had 20 or 45 million attendees. That was a really great experience, but I think we can make them a lot better. The audio, the music was just stereo. We're in a virtual world, we can do better than that. The performance was recorded. You're actually watching something that was done a long time ago. You're also just attending it with maybe 100 other people because of limitations of the platform. The only reason you know there's 45 million people attending that event in multiple parallel copies of the world is because someone tells you. And so it doesn't feel like a big event. There's also the communication side. They're generally silent. The audience is silent. And if you do have audio, you might hear the closest 5 people around you, and you don't feel the energy of what's happening. So I think there's a lot we can do to make this better.
Yeah, that's a common theme at this conference. This idea of creating an energy in virtual worlds that reflect what we feel like when we're at a live event. And just to keep talking about that for a second, do you think artists like Taylor Swift, if she decided to do an event like this, that she could create the energy that people feel like they get if they were to go to Madison Square Garden to see that concert?
If you get the delay low enough, and if you manage to get feedback from the audience back to the artist, I think you can recreate that. And I think there's some really good ideas about creating VR caves around the artist so you can see the audience while you're performing.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's interesting about just being in the audience, like frequently, to everybody's maybe disappointment, I'm going to lean over and whisper to the person next to me to talk about what I'm seeing, right? And you want to be able to recreate that. On our platform, we're able to do that so that if you're watching an event and we're standing together, I could say, oh, this is great, right? And so you think about that, that's a very one-on-one interaction. Paul's talking about the fabric of a live event. We don't just hear the conversation next to us. We hear the sound of being at an event. And I think we really need to think about that when we think about sound quality. Does that interfere with the quality of the music that we hear? Does it augment the overall experience? And I think we're finding the balance between those things. And I think it drives sort of to the next question, which is about realism. Like, is our goal realism? I think we all default to believing that we are always aiming towards realism, but the reality is that realism isn't always the goal, that realism sometimes can take away from the audio sound. There could be somebody standing next to me who's irritating me, like me speaking to my friend, right? And so how do we think about realism when we look at the future?
I think realism is overrated in virtual worlds. In Dolby, we do a lot of work in the movie industry, and the audio in a movie isn't real. It's engineered to sound good and to, emphasize the story. And it's the same in virtual worlds. I want to bring the music example back again because it's a really good example of this. If you wanted to recreate a music concert in a virtual world, you could hang speakers in the environment and play music out of those speakers and place them around. And you could also model the acoustics of the venue accurately. But do you want to have to design your venue so that it sounds good? Or do you want a good-looking venue that also sounds good and not have to worry about that link? In a virtual world, you don't have to worry about the link. You could have a virtual environment with lots of glass and hard surfaces. I'm not sure whether that looks cool or not, but you could, and have it sounding acoustically really good. And hanging speaker stacks in the environment, you're going to end up with a sweet spot, just like at a real concert. But do you need a sweet spot where you should stand there to get the best experience? Because a sweet spot means that you've got a not so sweet spot. You want to, if you're standing next to a speaker stack, it's going to sound pretty bad. So why replicate that? So as we're looking at it, we're looking at rendering the music experience egocentrically around the listener and then modifying it so that it behaves believably. And that way we can stay in control of the experience. We've got lots of experience with spatial music in Dolby. If you haven't checked out Atmos Music on Apple Music or Amazon Prime Music platforms, I encourage you to check it out. That's really, really cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the thing, and I've participated in a lot of the sessions and learned a lot today, and I do think that in some ways we take audio for granted. And if you think about the history of live audio, there's old stories about the Beatles when they went to Shea Stadium, they didn't have monitors. They couldn't hear anything they were playing, right? The Grateful Dead created their wall of sound. They were one of the first bands to really spend a fortune on creating a live audio experience that they felt reflected what they believed their audience wanted to hear. But in each of those cases, that sound was only as good as sort of the positionality of the person. So I went to a concert in Colorado. I was standing sort of on the edge. It was during the pandemic. I was a little uncomfortable. And I was not experiencing the same sound experience as the people in the center or more in the event arena. I felt like I was on the outside. I didn't feel immersed, right? And so when we start to talk about realism, and if that's our goal, well, now you can start to see that realism is not really my goal. My goal is to create the best possible audio experience for you to have, for you to feel like you're there, but also to improve the experience. And there's a lot of conversation in all of these sessions about, do we think we can get there? Do we think we can create events that make us feel like we're there? Do we think that AI generative content can replicate what we do as humans? And the answer to all these questions is yes. Over time, yes. And I think Dolby continues to be always thinking about sound. And I think if you think about your movie theater experiences, we talk about big screens all the time. But the reality is the sound is the key differentiator when you go to a movie. And I want, for when you come to a virtual experience, for the key differentiator to be two things. We feel very strongly about high fidelity graphics, and you'll see that on our platform. But I think that the marriage of high fidelity graphics and sound are just invaluable. And so let's talk about what the future is. So what's next for Dolby?
So I can tell you a bit about what we have on our platform at the moment and where it's going. So we do have communications APIs at the moment, which Odyssey use for Unity and Unreal. And with those, we can replicate audiences of up to 250 people at the moment. They can all be yelling out and cheering at the same time. Great for fan engagement for sports. And for audiences at music concerts. We're working to get that scale back up to a few thousand in that audience. We also have a really exciting new product that we just announced at South by Southwest. We gave a tech preview. It's called live performance streaming. And so we've got a remote production tool that makes it really easy to create spatial music from a venue. And we did a test at South by Southwest with Macklemore, and we streamed his music in Atmos, so spatially out to an audience, a select audience because it was a tech preview. And we also streamed that into a Unity virtual world with even more select audience. It's a real early proof of concept, the music in the virtual world there. But we're really interested in this space, and we're doing it in a way that's live because of our passion about the idea of interaction in live events. We also have APIs that enable you to stream high-quality video into a virtual world from professional encoders and camera gear. And so you can bring events into a virtual world. That's another feature that Odyssey use. We have another one which allows you to stream video out from a virtual world and in very low delay, interactivity again, stream that out to an audience of 100,000. And we've got a company in the UK called Improbable that's creating some really interesting experiences with that product at the moment. That same product we're using in venue for second screen experiences, and we can get the delay down with mobile edge compute and also infrastructure 5G to below 100 milliseconds. And we really are interested in AR experiences with that technology as well. So we have a lot coming out. So if people are interested. I'm really passionate about this area, so I'm keen to talk to anyone who's doing interesting things.
You can tell that both of us sort of love this part of what the virtual experience is, and I think, Dolby, that brand, has always been committed to making us think about audio, right? And so on the Odyssey platform, as we think towards the future, we host a lot of events on our platform. So we did an event for Ad Age and for McDonald's, and in these events, we had hundreds of people come through our digital twin environments, our virtual spaces. So Odyssey is built on the Unreal Engine, and we're able to import any Unreal levels into our space, and then you can use our controls. And our controls include Dolby Spatial I/O, it includes an avatar system, it includes animations, it includes ways to collaborate, to stream information, to drop objects in it. And so when we think about sound, we continue to think about, especially around events. So, if you wanted to do a virtual conference, a virtual hiring event, how do we start to incorporate the importance of audio in those events? And I think for me, the thing that I really like when I go to these virtual events is the ability I described to really engage people like I do at a real life event. The ability to walk up to somebody, have a conversation. And what I have found is that people, when they are representing themselves as avatars, they are much more likely to actually engage you in these virtual public spaces, because we're all trying to figure it out, and there is almost instant excitement when people come into a virtual conference event, because they do start to feel like that they have gone someplace, right? And I think that's our goal. The goal is to not make you feel like you're remote or virtual. It's to make you feel as if you've actually participated in an event with people who you wanted to be with. And I think the audio component of that for events is just critical. And the more we can do so that when I walk up to an object and maybe it's a new product, and as I walk up to that product, I touch it or connect with it, and then that product tells me stuff, right? Based on my proximity. And also when you start to think about it, based on maybe some key details about who I am, right? So we'll start to incorporate, I think, more artificial intelligence to allow for virtual chatbots, for people to be guides. So when you come into our environment, you're met by somebody who says, hey, you're at this conference, who are you coming to see? I can help get you there, right? And so all of these things just have the importance of a tightly connected audio and visual experience. And when Paul talks about latency and when we think about the event, it's incredibly important that when you see my avatar speak and animate, that it's speaking and animating in sync with my words, right? And so we're using Dolby's technology to do that also, right? To take the audio signal and convert it into animations. And so to continue on that thought, I would like to set a dial for my avatar. I tend to speak with my hands, right? So I want to turn the dial and say, when I'm speaking, overdo it. I want you to see my animation as much as you can. That is very tightly connected to Dolby's providing us information about the sound and then our ability to create ups and downs on it. Paul, if there was something you think that everybody should think about as their takeaway today, what do you think it should be?
Well, I think my takeaway, probably because the marketing people told me to say this, is given the time, I think if you come to our booth, we're really happy to talk to you. And our booth number is 324. And I'm keen.
That was the hardest part of this whole thing for us in the preparation, so very well done.
Yeah, I'm keen to talk to people. I think this is a great event to meet people doing interesting things.
Yeah, and I'll be at the Dolby booth tomorrow also. And so if you want to come by and talk about Odyssey, we'd be thrilled to do it. Does anybody have any questions before we go?
We got time for one question coming in.
Hey.
Hey.
Thank you for this beautiful talk. So I haven't really had a chance to use Dolby Spatial I/O for virtual reality. So what is what is different about Dolby's spatial, or what is better about Dolby's spatial algorithms? For example, better than Meta or Microsoft, for example.
I think it's our focus on events is where we differentiate with other platforms in this space. So we're focusing on interactive music experiences with this live performance streaming product, which is early. You can't use it in VR yet, but we're also focusing on event experiences where you hear everyone around you. And so it's a very different focus to what some of these other platforms are doing. And some of these other platforms are, I think, over-rotating on trying to make it realistic too. We're over-rotating on trying to make it sound good and be believable.
Thanks, everybody. We really appreciate you joining us today. The XR space is great, incredible, and there's just going to be more and more cool stuff coming out.
Let's have a warm round of applause for our guests here, Paul Boustead and Michael Kolbrener. Thank you, everyone.